All right, so we're diving into something today that I think everyone listening can relate to. You know that feeling, right? When it seems like if something can go wrong, it absolutely will.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
Exactly. And that's what we're exploring in this deep dive, Murphy's Law. Specifically, we're looking at Arthur Bloch's book, The Complete Murphy's Law. Now, this isn't about being negative or focusing on the bad stuff.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that sometimes things just go sideways, and there's a certain humor to be found in that chaos. So we're going to unpack some of the core ideas from Bloch's work, talk about why these laws resonate so much, and hopefully you'll walk away with a slightly funnier perspective on why things seem to, well, mess up sometimes.
I think what's really fascinating about Murphy's Law and why it's endured for so long is that it captures these universal human experiences. Those moments when you have a plan, you think everything's going smoothly, and then
Oh.
exactly, something completely unexpected throws a wrench in the works.
It's like it almost feels personal, you
Yeah.
know?
In Bloch's work, it really taps into that feeling. He takes these common frustrations, these little everyday disasters, and organizes them into this satirical framework. And by doing that, he actually helps us find the humor in those unavoidable stumbles.
So let's start with the bedrock, the basic principle of Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
It seems so simple, right?
Yeah, deceptively so. But there's a lot packed into that statement. And then you've got these key corollaries, which I think really flesh out the main idea, like nothing is as easy as it looks.
And everything takes longer than you think.
Yes.
Those two, those really get to the heart of it.
And think about it. These sayings, they speak directly to our tendency to underestimate. We underestimate how complex a task really is. We overestimate how efficient we're going to be.
Oh, definitely. And we've all been there, haven't we?
Right. It's like, you're running late for a meeting. You absolutely need to print out that report. You hit print.
And that's when the printer decides to stage a full-blown revolt.
Oh, yeah. The paper jam, the ink cartridge is suddenly empty. You've got error messages flashing across the screen. And of course, this all happens when you have literally zero time to spare.
It's almost as if the printer knows. It senses your desperation.
It really does. And that, in a nutshell, is Murphy's Law in action. It's not just one thing going wrong, it's a chain reaction.
Multiple points of failure, all converging at the worst possible moment.
And of course, this doesn't just apply to printers.
Oh, no, not at all.
And speaking of technology, sometimes it feels like technology was practically invented just to give Murphy's Law more ammunition.
Right. It's supposed to make our lives easier, more efficient, but so often
It does the opposite.
you hit the nail on the head. And I think Bloch touches on this with one of his laws. He says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Ooh, I like that one.
Right. And magic, well, it can be pretty unpredictable.
Oh, yeah. You never know what you're going to get.
And the point is, the more complex a system becomes, the more opportunities there are for things to go wrong. It's like a recipe for disaster just waiting to happen.
Well, like when you finally splurge and buy that fancy smart thermostat thinking, okay, now I'll have perfect temperature control.
Save money on energy.
Exactly. And then, of course, on the coldest night of the year,
It completely dies.
of course, the app won't connect, you can't figure out the manual controls, and suddenly you're huddled under blankets in a freezing house full of useless high-tech gadgets.
It's funny, but also not funny at all when you're living it. And I think it raises an interesting point about our dependence on technology.
Right.
The more we rely on these devices, the more disruptive their failures become. And it makes you wonder, is the convenience they offer really worth the potential for these epic malfunctions?
Especially when they seem timed for maximum inconvenience, like that thermostat on the coldest night.
It's like, no, I swear. Okay, so we've got printers rebelling, thermostats going rogue. Where else does Murphy's Law like to hang out?
Oh, the office. The workplace seems to be a breeding ground for Murphy's Law. I think we've all experienced that.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, think about it. You've got tight deadlines, competing priorities, sometimes unclear communication.
People stepping on each other's toes.
It's a recipe for chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And Bloch actually has some pretty spot-on observations about the workplace and how things tend to go wrong there. He says, the less you do, the less can go wrong.
Oof. That's a little cynical, but...
But true, right.
Mhm.
I mean, sometimes it feels like the people who fly under the radar, who don't really take on much responsibility.
They seem to avoid the pitfalls.
Exactly. They're not putting themselves out there, so there's less opportunity for things to backfire.
And then there's that whole thing about the person who actually knows what's going on.
Oh, you mean the one who gets fired?
Exactly. Like in any organization, there will always be one person who knows what's going on. This person must be fired. It's funny because it's often true.
Sadly true. You have someone who's competent, reliable, they've got all the institutional knowledge.
They're a threat to the status quo.
Right. They upset the balance, and then you have the opposite scenario, like you were saying earlier, where someone's just coasting along, not really contributing much.
But somehow, they end up looking good when chaos strikes. Like, remember that time when the entire email server crashed?
Oh, yeah.
And I just spent hours finishing this crucial report, hit send right before the deadline, and then poof. Gone.
Into the digital abyss.
Meanwhile, the colleague who spent the afternoon gossiping by the water cooler
Suddenly becomes the calm and collected one.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so glad I didn't send that email yet.
It's like a reward for inaction. And I think this really highlights something interesting about Murphy's Law in the workplace. There's often this disconnect between effort and outcome.
Totally. You can put in all the work, be the most dedicated person in the room, and things can still blow up in your face.
While someone else just sails through unscathed. So you start to wonder, what's the point?
Right. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about money. Yes, economics. Because Murphy's Law, it has a special way of showing up when it comes to our wallets.
Oh, it does. I mean, the financial world is all about predictions, probabilities, and yet it's constantly being blindsided by the unexpected.
Right. And Block, he nails it with some of his observations here. Like, an ounce of image is worth a pound of performance.
So true. Perception often trumps reality, especially in the market.
It's all about appearances.
And then there's the idea that the opulence of the front office decor varies inversely with the solvency of the firm.
Classic. You see this big flashy headquarters and you think, wow, this company must be doing great.
But behind the facade.
They're crumbling.
Right. Smoke and mirrors. And haven't we all gotten that hot stock tip from someone? You know, the one that's a sure thing.
Oh, yeah. The can't miss investment.
And you think, okay, this is it. This is how I'm going to get ahead.
Finally retire early.
And then
crickets.
The stock tanks.
It's like the universe has a personal vendetta against your financial well-being. It really does feel that way sometimes. And, you know, I think what makes economics so susceptible to Murphy's Law is that it's inherently unpredictable.
Right. Even with all the fancy algorithms and expert analysis, there are always these unforeseen variables that can throw everything off.
So much for those sure things. Okay, if we think the office and the economy can be unpredictable, let's talk about government.
Oh, boy.
Bureaucracy.
That's where Murphy's Law really goes to town.
It's like it was designed to be a Murphy's Law playground.
I mean, you've got layer upon layer of procedures, forms, regulations.
Endless red tape.
So many opportunities for things to get lost, delayed, misinterpreted.
And Block captures this perfectly. He's got laws like the solution to a problem changes the problem.
And new systems create new problems.
Right. It's like every time they try to fix something, they just create a whole new set of issues.
It's a never-ending cycle.
Think about something as simple as applying for a permit.
Should be straightforward, right?
You'd think so. Fill out the forms, pay the fee, done. Then the application gets misfiled, it gets sent to the wrong department.
And then it gets lost in the mail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And weeks later, you're still waiting while your simple request is buried under a mountain of bureaucratic blunders.
It's infuriating.
Right.
And what's interesting is a lot of times these failures in government, they're not even the result of malice or incompetence.
Right.
It's just the sheer complexity of the system itself. Every step in the process is another potential point of failure.
And when you have a system with that many steps,
the potential for things to go wrong just multiplies exponentially. Okay, but let's step away from these big systems and institutions.
Hey, let's get a little more personal.
Let's talk about everyday life. Because Murphy's Law, it doesn't just operate on a grand scale.
Oh, no, it's with us constantly in all of those little annoyances.
And it's often in those small, relatable moments that Murphy's Law feels the most.
Pointed.
Like it's targeting us specifically.
Yeah.
Like, why does toast always land butter side down?
Especially on a new carpet. Right. And Block actually suggests there's a correlation. The more expensive the carpet, the more likely the toast is to land butter side down.
There's a whole equation for it, I think.
And then there's that classic one. You lose something, you search everywhere for it, you finally give up and buy a replacement.
And the original magically reappears.
Of
Right. It
course.
was hiding in plain sight the whole time.
Or here's a modern-day Murphy's Law classic.
Yeah.
You drop your phone, and of course, it's the one day you haven't backed it up.
And the screen shatters into a million pieces.
Right. It's like the universe is conspiring to make our lives just a little bit more difficult.
It's those small, everyday frustrations that really drive home the point that even in the simplest situations, things can and often will go wrong. Okay, now, you might think that in fields like science and engineering, where there's so much precision, so much control,
Yeah, you'd think Murphy's Law wouldn't have much power there.
but you'd be wrong. Oh, yeah, because the very nature of experimentation, of pushing boundaries and trying new things, it opens up a whole new realm of potential for things to go sideways.
I guess that makes sense.
Block, he's got this law that says if an experiment works, something has gone wrong.
Okay, that's a bit pessimistic, isn't it?
Well, it's more about the inherent skepticism of science, right?
Yeah.
You're always looking for errors, for ways to disprove your hypothesis.
I see. It's about being rigorous.
Exactly. And then you have this concept of the replication crisis.
The what?
It's this idea that a lot of scientific findings, when other researchers try to replicate them, they can't get the same results.
Oh, wow.
So Block has this law that says no experiment is reproducible.
Okay, so even in science, with all the careful planning and methodology,
There's still room for Murphy's law to operate.
it's like the scientist who runs a perfect experiment, everything's going flawlessly, the data's looking amazing.
And then a power surge wipes out all their work.
Ugh, that's the worst. Years of research gone just like that.
And it just highlights that in science and engineering, the consequences of Murphy's law can be huge.
I guess that makes sense. We're talking about really complex systems, delicate experiments.
Yeah, and even small errors can have these big, unpredictable consequences.
All right, so we've covered technology, the office, finances, government, science. Is there anywhere Murphy's Law doesn't show up?
Well, how about social interactions? Because it seems like that's another area where Murphy's law really likes to meddle.
Oh, absolutely. Communication is tricky enough as it is.
Right, and you've got all these unspoken rules, different communication styles.
People interpreting things in different ways.
Exactly, it's a minefield. And Block's laws, they really capture that potential for things to go wrong in social situations. He says for every action, there's an equal and opposite criticism.
So true. It's like no matter what you do, someone's going to have something negative to say.
And then there's this one, it's pretty cynical, but I think there's some truth to it. He says, everybody lies, but it doesn't matter since nobody listens.
Oof, that's rough.
But it speaks to this idea that communication is often more about performance than actual connection.
Right. It's like, are we even really listening to each other? Or are we just waiting for our turn to talk?
Good question. And haven't you had those times when you've tried to give someone a genuine compliment and they completely misinterpret it?
Oh, all the time. It's like they're looking for the hidden insult.
Right. And suddenly, this well-intentioned gesture just creates this awkwardness, this tension.
Yeah, and it just makes you want to avoid saying anything at all.
Exactly. And I think this shows how Murphy's law can operate in even the most well-meaning interactions.
It's all about perception, right? The same words can mean completely different things to different people.
And the more people involved in a situation, the greater the potential for those misunderstandings and those unintended consequences.
So basically, just stay home and avoid all human contact.
Probably the safest bet. Okay, one last area I want to touch on because I think it's a good example of how Murphy's law can show up in unexpected places. Sports and performance.
Oh, interesting.
Right. You'd think in these arenas where skill and preparation are so important.
Yeah, you'd think those would be the deciding factors.
You would, but then Murphy's law comes along and
There was a curveball.
exactly. And it seems like the higher the stakes, the more pressure involved.
The more likely it is that something will go wrong.
Block actually talks about this. He says, the higher-ups who've come to see your demo, the lower your chances of success.
Like stage fright on steroids.
It's that feeling of being under a microscope.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you start making mistakes you wouldn't normally make.
Your skills just abandon you.
Right. It's like your body betrays you at the worst possible time.
Think about that athlete who's about to take a penalty kick. The whole game is riding on this one shot. Their shoelace breaks.
Of course. And they missed the shot. All those years of training, all that dedication.
Undone by a faulty shoelace?
It's almost comical. And it just goes to show that even in areas where talent and hard work are so important, you can't completely escape Murphy's law.
So no matter how much we plan, how much we prepare, there's always that element of the unexpected, the unpredictable.
The shoelace breaking at the worst possible moment.
Exactly. And that brings us to the 21st century, because obviously technology has changed so much about our lives.
And the ways in which things can go wrong have also evolved.
Right. So has Murphy's Law kept up with the times?
Oh, absolutely. It's thrived in the digital age. Block actually includes some more modern observations in his book, like this one. Your IBM PC-compatible computer grows more incompatible every day.
Oh, I feel that one. Every time I update my software, something breaks.
Right. It's like this constant cycle of obsolescence.
Like you said earlier, technology and magic.
Two sides of the same coin.
And that reminds me of this time I was about to have a super important Zoom call. I updated my phone's software, to make sure everything was running smoothly.
Of course.
And then the microphone decides to start randomly muting itself.
Oh, no?
So I'm talking, I'm gesturing, I'm doing the whole thing, but no one on the other end can hear me.
Murphy's Law strikes again.
Right. And it's that same principle, right? Technology failing at the most crucial moment. It's just updated for our modern, hyper-connected world.
Exactly. The ways in which things go wrong may change, but the underlying principle of Murphy's Law remains constant.
All right, so as we've been talking about all this, I think it's important to emphasize the complete Murphy's Law, it's not meant to be a doom and gloom kind of thing.
Right.
It's not a guidebook for pessimism.
It's more about taking a humorous, maybe even a slightly philosophical look at those inevitable absurdities of life.
Exactly. It's acknowledging that chaos is a part of the human experience. And sometimes the best way to deal with it is to just laugh.
Exactly. And I think Bloch's work, it encourages us to embrace that unpredictable nature of life.
Right. Don't take yourself or your plans too seriously.
Because things are going to go wrong. It's inevitable, so why not find a way to laugh about it?
I like that. Find the humor in the chaos. So next time you're facing a situation where it feels like everything's going wrong, take a moment, step back, and ask yourself, could Murphy's Law be at play here?
And maybe, just maybe, seeing it through that lens will give you a new perspective.
Make it a little less frustrating.
Exactly. And if you want to explore more of these humorous observations about life's little twists and turns, I highly recommend checking out Arthur Bloch's work.
Yeah, it's a fun read. All right, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Murphy's Law. We'll see you next time.